There's one ingredient that shows up everywhere, and almost no one questions it. Last week, we talked about how to read labels and how quickly things can look good enough at a glance. But there's one part of the label that deserves its own conversation because it shows it frequently, and almost no one really knows what it means. You've seen it before. You flip a package over, you scan the ingredients, and everything looks pretty reasonable. And then you see it. Natural flavors. It sounds harmless, it even sounds healthy, but there's a question most of us never stop to ask. What is actually in that? Not in a technical sense, not in a marketing definition, but in a nutritional way. What is my body actually interacting with?
Do you ever wish your day wasn't dictated by your health? Are you tired of being tired all the time, or is pain holding you back from enjoying your time with your family? Would you like to manage your symptoms holistically, but you just don't know where to begin? I am so excited that you're here. This podcast will help you understand how natural remedies work so you can relieve your symptoms and live a fuller life. My name is Penny. I'm an occupational therapist, past pharmaceutical rep, a mom, and a wife with a strong faith, and for 25 years, I battled through debilitating Crohn's disease. I took all the medicine and did all the surgeries that stole so much time with my family, but never truly healed me. I finally realized if I was going to survive this disease, I needed to open my stubborn eyes to alternative solutions. I researched how perfectly our bodies work with plants and a lifestyle that made my health less of a burden to my family and aligned so beautifully with my faith and my medical training. If you're ready to reclaim your life with holistic options that are easy to implement as a busy mom and provide relief that lasts, this is the podcast for you.
In the last episode, we walked through a simple 5-step filter for reading labels. Labels are complicated, and they are becoming more and more of an art every day. I remember I used to hear, if the ingredient list is longer than your thumbnail, then don't buy it. Oh, how far we have come since then. We are much more educated these days. As a quick review, last week we learned my 5-step filter for making a quick decision when choosing a quality product. Make it matter in moments was the acronym. MIMIM, meaningful certifications such as USDA, NSF, USP, independent testing. Look if there's a certificate of analysis for third-party testing. Manufacturing transparency, can you trace it? Ingredient purity, is it GMP, good manufacturing process? Does it have metals? Material safety, look at the packaging, look and see if that plastic is leaching into your food. While all of those are incredibly important, I was amazed when I looked closer at what natural flavors actually means and allows in our food, and decided to take a time to dedicate one podcast to uncovering the truth about natural flavors, because it is on almost every single food product I have. When I was on the yeast diet, I was even told that I couldn't have anything with natural flavors because it hides ingredients that might not have been acceptable for my strict diet. Sometimes it can be fine, totally fine, and sometimes it's a disguise of a potential train wreck dressed up with pretty words. I lean towards mostly train wreck, as if your ingredients were good, you wouldn't hide them under natural flavors umbrella. It sounds harmless, it even sounds healthy, but when you actually look closer, it's one of the least transparent ingredients on the entire label. It fails at least 4 out of 5 of our points in our MIMIM acronym. So we're going to take a closer look into what qualifies as natural flavors. Welcome to episode 6, Natural Flavors, the dirty secrets found in ingredient labels. To give us a better understanding of what your body may be interacting with, we're going to find out what natural flavors actually mean. So we're going to start simple. According to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, natural flavors come from natural sources: fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices, meat or seafood, fermentation processes. So yes, the starting point's natural. That sounds amazing, doesn't it? But here's the part that most people don't realize. By the time that ingredient makes it into your food, it may be very far removed from its original form. It can be extracted, concentrated, chemically altered, recombined, stabilized until it becomes something designed for consistency, shelf life, and repeatable flavor. So when you read natural flavors, you're not reading a single ingredient, you're reading a category. And that category can include dozens of individual compounds and sometimes more. And those compounds do not have to be disclosed. And that's where this starts to matter more than most people realize. That's where I started going down the rabbit hole. So let's clarify this piece because this is where a lot of confusion comes from. For something to be labeled a natural flavor, it generally means it originated from a natural source, like I said before, and that's it. It does not mean minimally processed, whole, simple, or unchanged. It just means that the starting point was natural. And we already know natural can mean a host of things from our last episode. It's not a regulated term. And so from there, it can be chemically altered, like I said, isolated, recombined, stabilized, and it can still legally fall under that category. Labeling rules focus on function, not just on substance. So if something is part of a proprietary, i.e., grandma's secret ingredient, flavor system, it can be grouped under natural flavor because companies are not required to share their trade secrets. If it plays a nutritional or bulk role in the food itself, it must stand alone. So if you think about a cake, if sugar is in the cake batter, it has to be listed as sugar. But if sugar is a tiny amount inside a vanilla flavor extract in the icing, it can be hidden under natural flavor. Same ingredient, different role. So why this lack of transparency matters? This is where we have to start to think for a moment because this doesn't automatically mean that something is harmful, but it does mean that you're seeing basically a summary, a Cliff's Notes maybe, not the full picture. And that matters because your body does not respond to labels. It responds to actually what is inside of your food. So what can be considered natural flavors? First, flavor compounds. Although they're often modified, these are the parts that create the taste of the product, but they're rarely just extracted and left alone. This is not like adding a little vanilla or a little lemon juice and mixing it in. These flavors are, like I said, they're intensified. They're recombined with other substances. They can be isolated out and created as purely a chemical repeat of a flavor that you know, to create a very specific flavor profile. So examples include things like maltodextrin, modified starches, flavor isolates. So I'm going to go back and pause for just a minute on maltodextrin for a second because this is one that bothers me. So I've done a lot of research on this. So even though it comes from something like corn or rice, it behaves very differently in the body. Research has actually shown that maltodextrin has a very high glycemic index. That means it can spike your blood sugar very quickly and potentially alter your gut bacteria balance when consumed frequently. And there are studies that look at how certain processed carbohydrates, that's what this is considered, may impact the gut microbiome, immune signaling over time. It is ultimately an ultra-processed carbohydrate, not something you'd find in a whole food kitchen and often found in protein bars, meal replacement snacks, or shakes. Small amounts in isolation are generally considered safe, yes, but the question becomes, what's your frequency and what's your context in eating these? Because frequent intake, like maltodextrin, is in diet bars, diet shakes, protein bars and shakes. Again, all these things that are promoted as healthy because they say no sugar, but it's all these fake sugars. Most people eating those bars and shakes are trying to get healthy and typically substitute bars and shakes on a regular basis. So it's not like you're just eating one of these bars here and there. Typically, they're eating them daily or more than once daily. And maltodextrin has very little sweetness on your tongue, but it acts like a rapid sugar hit inside of your body. Just a little FYI. So moving on to flavor isolates. So common flavor isolates that you'll see is vanillin, which is vanilla flavor. I'm not going to get all these words pronounced properly. Ethyl butyrate. It's a fruity pineapple flavor. Isoamyl acetate is banana. Surely you knew that. And diacetyl is buttery flavor. These chemicals are used to build flavors like a recipe, but with isolated chemicals instead of whole foods. So companies use them for consistency so that every batch tastes the same, for shelf stability, so a product, doesn't go bad quickly, for lower cost than real ingredients, stronger and a more controlled flavor. So potentially it's chemically identical to what's in nature, like a banana or a strawberry, but it's completely missing the full context of the whole food. So there's no nutritive value in this perfect flavor profile. It's just cheaper and easier and more consistent. So again, it's not about one ingredient being bad. It's about understanding when something is heavily processed, it does not act like a whole food anymore. So the second thing that can be considered a natural flavor, solvents and carriers. So this is one of the most overlooked pieces, actually, because sometimes the flavor itself isn't the issue. It's what's carrying the flavor into the product. To extract and stabilize flavors, companies use compounds like ethanol, which is alcohol, propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is a synthetic liquid. It's a compound that's made from petroleum, and it's highly processed and not something that you'd ever use in your home kitchen. In large amounts, it can affect your gut or cause sensitivity in some people. Another ingredient is glycerin. Glycerin is a thick, slightly sweet liquid that can be derived from plant oils like coconut or soy, and that's amazing. But just gonna say it's typically synthetic and you don't know the difference. And quality matters. A lot of plant-based glycerin is generally considered low risk. Synthetic versions are more processed. In higher amounts, it may cause digestive upset like bloating or loose stools. Closer to natural, yes, but it depends on your sourcing. Once again, is it made in the USA or is it bottled in the USA? And the processing that it goes through. So here's the nuance. These are all considered safe in small amounts, but they are also highly processed, many petroleum derived or industrially refined. And some individuals simply, especially those with sensitive systems, report things such as headaches, digestive discomfort, skin reactions, or that vague just kind of feeling off after you're eating certain foods. Not because these are inherently toxic, but because they add to the total load your body is processing. Something really important to remember, because we could be sitting next to each other and eating the same poison, I guess you could say, and I could react differently than you. And it's not simply because one of us is sensitive and the other isn't. Maybe one of us is carrying a heavy load of other toxins than the other. So when you start to zoom out a little, these compounds aren't just found in food. They show up in a surprising number of places. So propylene glycol, for example, is used in obviously processed foods. It's in your medications, it's in your cosmetics and lotions and deodorants and vape liquids. Its job is to keep things moist, to help ingredients blend, and to carry other compounds evenly. So glycerin has a very similar role. It helps retain moisture, it creates smooth textures, it stabilizes formulations. And you'll find it in things like protein bars and flavored drinks, skincare products, toothpaste, herbal extracts, and even natural wellness products. Again, these compounds are widely considered safe in small amounts. But the overall concern that I keep repeating arrives when you look at this cumulative exposure, because now it's not just what you eat, but what you apply on your skin, what you inhale in your lungs, and what your body processes all day long. Some research and clinical observations suggest that repeated exposure to certain solvents and carriers may contribute to skin irritation, gut sensitivity, or neurological symptoms in more sensitive individuals. So the question is, this one ingredient, what's hurting me? It's how much am I interacting with in my body in a single day? So, the third item that can be listed as a natural ingredient is preservatives and stabilizers. These are often part of the system, even if not always listed directly. They are things like sodium benzoate, potassium sorbate, antioxidant stabilizers, and they're used to extend shelf life, prevent spoilage, keep flavors consistent over time. And this is where a simple distinction helps because there's a difference between food that is designed to nourish your body and food that is designed to last on the shelf. Both exist for a reason, but they serve different purposes for different people. One is for our health, and one is for the profit of the company making it. And this is where most of us have had that moment. So, if we pause for a second and talk about what a stabilizer actually is, this word gets used a lot, but it's rarely explained. A stabilizer is something that is added into a product or into food that makes the product keep its texture to prevent things from separating, like oil and water. It keeps consistency in the product over time. So, every time you buy that product, you're going to be getting the same texture, and it extends shelf life. So without stabilizers, a product might separate into layers, lose its texture, spoil quickly, or just taste different from batch to batch. With stabilizers, it keeps it uniform, it keeps it predictable, it keeps it the same. So that sounds pretty helpful, and in many ways it is. But the deeper level is that if a food can sit on a shelf for 6 months, 9 months, even a year or more and still look, smell, and taste the same, it is completely engineered for stability. And again, this isn't about labeling that as bad, but it helps us to understand that this is very different from food that was designed to be alive and fresh and nourishing for our bodies. This is why we are told to stay away from those processed foods, because real food, it changes, it spoils, it shifts. And yeah, it's a pain to go to the store every single day, but we need to be aware of the things that we can, perhaps chop when they're fresh and freeze them, and keeping them frozen helps them last longer. So when something doesn't change over long periods of time, it's often because multiple layers of stabilizers and preservatives are working together to hold it in place. All chemicals. The fourth item that can be in natural flavors is processing aids. It's actually kind of the invisible layer of food because this one is important. There are substances that are used during manufacturing that don't have to appear on the label at all. These are called processing aids, and sometimes that includes exposure to things like pesticide residues, industrial processing compounds. For example, our conversation about glyphosate that we had a couple weeks ago, that comes in processing aids. It was used on the product before it hit the factory, and it does not have to be listed. So it's not necessarily an ingredient, but as something that might be present from how ingredients were grown and processed. And this is where it gets even more interesting. So processing aids can include things like anti-foaming agents, bleaching agents. Think about all of your white flour, your white bread, your white rice, your white sugar, everything that has been bleached. That's not in your ingredients. Bleach, nobody would ever buy it. Filtering agents, solvents used during extraction, enzyme treatments that alter the food structure, even things like how your grains are dried, how oils are extracted, how ingredients are refined. They can all be a part of this process without being listed directly. It can all go under the umbrella of natural flavors. Doesn't that sound great? There's ongoing research exploring how Repeated exposure to low levels of certain agricultural and industrial compounds will always influence our gut microbiome diversity, inflammatory pathways, our metabolic signaling. Do you hear the consistency over everything we talk about that is negatively affecting our gut microbiome, our inflammation, our metabolic signaling? And again, we're not talking about just one exposure. We're talking about small amounts over and over across years. So the fifth thing that can be listed legally in natural flavors is hidden excitotoxins. So this is where things sound a little bit confusing if no one can explain them clearly, but you've probably heard of MSG, and MSG stands for monosodium glutamate. It's a flavor enhancer. And everybody was on this no MSG kick for a very long time. And at its core, it is a form of glutamate, which is actually a naturally occurring amino acid that your body uses every single day. Glutamate itself is not bad. Your brain uses it constantly for communication between cells. But here's where the term excitotoxin comes in. An excitotoxin is actually something that can overstimulate your nerve cells. So in certain individuals, especially those who are more sensitive, this overstimulation can show up as headaches, as brain fog, or irritability, or neurological sensitivity. So some research has explored how excess free glutamate, which is glutamate that is not bound in whole food proteins, may overstimulate receptors in the brain. So the key point is, even when MSG is not listed, you can still say no MSG, but it may still have free glutamate compounds present in your foods, causing the same side effects as MSG. So these come from ingredients like hydrolyzed proteins, yeast extract, certain flavor systems. So, like I said, you could say, I don't eat MSG, but you can still notice symptoms after eating certain foods because not everyone reacts, but some people absolutely notice a difference. Kind of like me with fake sugars. I know a difference the minute they touch my lips, especially if their gut is already inflamed, their nervous system is already under stress, or they're in a season of healing and their body is just a little bit more fragile. Number 6. Natural, in quotes, acids that aren't so simple. So we'll take citric acid as an example. It sounds like lemons, right? Or it sounds simple, but most commercial citric acid is actually produced through fermentation using molds like Aspergillus niger. So again, it starts natural, but it becomes highly processed. And some people report after having any kind of citric acid that they have digestive irritation, inflammatory responses, or sensitivity when consuming it frequently. I feel like this is the same song, 100th verse. So the bigger picture, the lens that I want you to see this through is the concern, again, is not one of these simple ingredients that we're discussing. It is just consistently being exposed to tiny little natural flavors or things that are accepted as natural flavors over time, hidden in mixtures that our bodies were never designed to process on a daily basis. So we just need to find an important balance. So if we go over the balance between natural flavors or no natural flavors, most of these ingredients are classified as safe. They've been studied, but in isolation, and many people tolerate them just fine in isolation. But the trouble lives where safety is often based on single ingredient studies. Real life includes layered and repeated exposures, and every body processes differently. There are emerging conversations in research around this cumulative exposure, microbiome disruption, and individual sensitivity based on what that body is going through at the time. So instead of saying, is this good or is this bad, a better question becomes, how does this interact with my body over a long period of time? And this is important to say that yes, there are situations where natural flavors are not problematic. Some may come from real vanilla extract or real citrus oils or spice extracts. But the challenge is you don't know which version you're getting because there's absolutely zero transparency. Because if it were simple, it would most likely be listed more specifically and more directly on the ingredient label and not hiding under the umbrella of natural flavors. Okay, so we're going to zoom out for a second because what we're seeing in food labels is not unique to food. It shows up in body care in a very similar way when you see the word fragrance on a product's label. It works almost exactly like natural flavors. It is a catch-all term. That one word can represent dozens, sometimes hundreds of individual compounds. And just like in food, companies are not required to disclose what's inside that blend. That protection exists under trade secret law. So what you're seeing on the label is not the full formulation. It is a category once again. So here's where this becomes more than just label awareness because your body doesn't interact with fragrance the same way it interacts with food. It actually interacts through absorbing in your skin, through inhaling it in your lungs, and then if you're absorbing into your skin, it's absorbing into your bloodstream. So your skin is not a barrier in the way that we often think. It's actually absorbing everything around it. It's our largest organ in our body. So it has a selective absorption system. Some compounds can pass through the skin and enter circulation just like that. And when you inhale fragrance, those compounds can interact directly with your respiratory system and actually your nervous system. Because there's research showing that certain airborne compounds can influence your mood, your brain signaling, and your stress responses. Because these certain airborne compounds can influence these signaling, and part of the reason for that is how quickly scent affects our brain. Fragrance doesn't just stay in your nose, it actually goes straight to your brain. Did you know that? Your sense of smell is directly connected to the part of your brain that handles emotions and memory. It's called the amygdala. So that's why a scent can instantly take you back to a moment in time, a person, a feeling, maybe a certain smell of cookies or a certain smell on someone's clothes, sometimes before you even have time to think about it. So when we're breathing in fragrances throughout the day, we're not just smelling something pleasant, we're interacting with our nervous system in real time. That's how influential fragrances can be on our body. So let's make one term very simple. Your endocrine system is your body's hormone communication system. It regulates things like your metabolism, sleep, fertility, stress, and energy. Some compounds found in fragrance mixtures have been studied for their potential to interfere with that hormone signaling, not by destroying hormones, but by mimicking them, by blocking them, or altering how signals are received. For example, compounds like phthalates, often associated with fragrance stability, have been evaluated in research looking at hormone balance and even reproductive health. We can't blame every fertility struggle on an ingredient, but there is meaningful research showing that phthalates and other endocrine disruptors can interfere with the body in very real and very specific ways. And I don't want to roll past this as just another vague phrase like fertility issues, but literally on the female side, this is not abstract. Specifically, research suggests these compounds, phthalates, may impact ovarian reserve, meaning the quantity and quality of eggs available over time. They may influence how your follicles develop, whether ovulation happens as it should, and even whether implantation is successful. It directly impacts your ability to get pregnant. They can also interfere with your hormone signaling, the very communication system that coordinates the entire reproductive process. On the male side, we see a different but equally important pattern Phthalates have been linked to reduced testosterone signaling, changes in sperm quality, things like count, movement, shape, and even damage the sperm DNA itself. So when we talk about endocrine disruptors, I feel like we use those terms so loosely that we have to wake up and realize exactly what that means in our bodies. We are not just using a broad label. We're talking about compounds that may quietly interfere with the timing, the signaling, the integrity of reproduction at many different levels. That is a practical example of how even small, seemingly harmless exposures can add up over time. Because when something touches both hormone communication and our cellular health, even in subtle ways, it's really worth paying attention to. We can't just say, oh, it's been going on forever, we're going to be fine. It's getting worse, and we're getting more products, and our load is increasing every year, our load is increasing. This doesn't mean every exposure is harmful. Once again, brings us back once again to the biggest point that dose and frequency matter. In everyday life, fragrance exposure doesn't happen just once a day. If you think about it, you use shampoo, you use conditioner, you use lotion and deodorant, and then perfume, and then cleaning products, and then laundry detergents, and air fresheners, and candles. That's not one exposure. That is a layered exposure of a whole lot of things in one day, if not a couple hours, repeated daily over years. And this is what researchers are referring to when they talk about environmental exposure, not one product, but the accumulation of many small exposures over time. So that load doesn't look the same for everyone. We all have different daily habits that either increase or decrease what our bodies are handling. One person might snack on cheese and crackers every day, and another person reaches for a red apple. So those choices may seem very small, but over time, they shape what your body is processing on a regular basis. And it helps explain why two people can have completely different responses to the exact same thing. One person can say, I feel totally fine, while someone else says, I get headaches immediately. Both of them can be true. But sensitivity is not random. It is influenced directly by what's already happening inside of our body. Things like our detox pathways, our nervous system state, our hormone balance, our gut health, they all play a role in how someone responds. Some individuals, especially those that get migraines, asthma, or chemical sensitivities, they tend to notice symptoms more quickly. Maybe their load is rocking around at a much higher level than the rest of us. Not because they're overreacting, not because they're being hypochondriacs, but because their systems are more sensitive and more responsive. So it all starts to come together when you realize that natural flavors and fragrance are built on the same idea, a broad label representing a complex, undisclosed mixture designed to create a consistent sensory experience. One is for taste, one is for smell, but both interact with your body in very real ways that are not necessarily good, and both contribute to your total daily exposure load. And once that clicks, it kind of starts to change how you look at things. Why simplifying inputs can make a much bigger difference over time. You start recognizing these things when you start trying to purchase them. I think a lot of times we try to isolate one food or one product as the problem if we feel bad. Oh, I ate the bread, or oh, was it the dairy? And sometimes it is, but more often than we realize, it's not just that one thing. It's the buildup, the smaller ingredients, the repeated exposures, the things that seem harmless on their own, but start to stack up throughout the day. So when the headache shows up, or your stomach feels off, it may not be that one thing you just ate. It may be the point where your body has simply had enough. I would say most of the time, it's not necessarily the food or the product alone. It's the combination of what we're exposed to all day long that the body is trying to keep up with. And then we have this little umbrella of natural flavors. So maybe there's soy lecithin in there, and that's what you are sensitive to, and you think, oh, the bread is what hurt me, but maybe it's really not the bread. If you had had real whole food bread, if you didn't have that soy lecithin in there. See what I'm saying? So when you start to pull it all together, think about a typical day for a second for you. You wake up, we use the shampoo, we use the conditioner, maybe a body wash or a soap. I wash my face, possibly with a fragrance. You put on lotion, you put on deodorant, maybe you put on perfume, maybe cosmetics that have a scent. Breakfast might be something quick, maybe a packaged bar, flavored yogurt, or coffee with a creamer that has added flavors. You clean up the kitchen with a scented spray. Then laundry detergent is still on your clothes or maybe on your dish towels. Midday, you're eating a snack like crackers and cheese, something convenient. Dinner has a sauce, a seasoning, or dressing with ingredients that you really didn't pay attention to or think about. But throughout the day, you're breathing in air fresheners, you're breathing in candles, or whatever's in the environment around you. None of those things on their own are a big deal. But by the end of the day, your body has processed an incredibly long list of small inputs. So when a headache shows up or your stomach feels off, it's easy to point to the last thing that you ate. But sometimes it's not that moment. It's the accumulation of everything that came before it, and your body just reached the point that it said, enough, I can't deal with it anymore. So what do we actually do with all of this information? Because I'm not trying to ruin your favorite products today. We don't panic. We don't try to control everything around us all the time, and we don't swing to extremes. We just come back to that very simple question. Does this ingredient list make sense, or is it trying to hide something? If you want to make changes, keep it simple. Choose foods with definitely a shorter ingredient list. Prioritize whole or minimally processed foods. Look for products that clearly state flavor sources. You don't have to overhaul everything overnight. Just start paying attention. Once you're aware, you'll be surprised how much easier it is to make different choices when you're standing right there in the aisle and you got to run really fast. Your education changes everything. Just opening your eyes, the fact that natural flavors is not natural flavors is a huge step. So if you've discovered something gross and unexpected in a food that you love, it would likely change how often you choose it. You might pause before reaching for that food again. Same concept. I will never forget the first time that my son was eating a gyro, and he absolutely loved it. He had already eaten about half of his plate rather quickly. And my husband said, "Isn't that good? Isn't lamb delicious?" And as his mom, I knew the moment those words came out of my husband's mouth, it was not going to go well. And at that moment, my son stopped chewing. He set his fork down. He gulped what was in his mouth, and that was it. He did not finish his meal, and he has never eaten a gyro again. Once he knew he was eating lamb, he was done. To him, that was it. It doesn't matter that it tastes good. It was lamb. He will never eat it. So the thing is, it wasn't bad for him at all, but that's kind of how I think about this, that when you discover something about a food that you love that doesn't quite sit right with you anymore, it naturally changes your desire for it. Not in a forced way, just kind of in a way that is being honest with yourself. That was fun while it lasted, but I'm good for now kind of a way. So there's something really steady and really reassuring in this. Again, so fascinating that your body was created with wisdom, literally. It wasn't designed to keep up with the endless complexity of foods. It responds best to what is real, what is recognizable, what it knows how to process. And if you feel like your body has been in a pattern that you can't quite figure out, maybe you're gaining weight without understanding why, or your joints feel more achy than they used to, or something just feels off, that's not a sign that you've done anything wrong. It may just be a quiet nudge to simplify what you can, to come back to what your body can work with and to move forward with what you're learning with a little bit more grace. So, natural doesn't always mean simple, and simple is often what the body understands best. We tend to give aging a whole lot of credit. I think about this a lot. Like our bodies are just designed to slowly break down. But what if part of what we call aging is actually accumulation and accumulation of ingredients our bodies were never really designed to process in the first place? And maybe the question isn't just, is this safe today? But what is this going to do to me over the next 10, 20, 30 years if I continue having the same thing over and over? Because maybe some of those aches, maybe the inflammation, the fatigue that we expect aren't just inevitable. Maybe we shouldn't expect to feel that way. Maybe they're influenced by what we consistently give our bodies over time. So the next time you see natural flavors or fragrance, you don't need to overthink it, but just pay attention. That small internal check, that moment that we pause, learn to listen to it, is where the real change begins in our life. If you want to take this further, go back and listen to that full 5-step label filter episode last week, because this is exactly where the framework starts to come to life. Awareness doesn't have to overwhelm you. It simply gives you the opportunity to choose differently moving forward. This is not about doing everything perfectly. It is not about changing everything all at one time and getting overwhelmed. We want to remove the overwhelm. It is about learning, paying attention, and making good, cautious choices that support your body over time, over life, so that you can be healthier and more active and more agile even as you age. So one step at a time. That's how this becomes natural. Have a great week.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, hit that follow button, leave a 5-star review if you're so willing, and help spread the message of becoming natural by sharing it with a friend. Check out the resources in the show notes and join the email list to stay on top of all the latest and greatest happenings at Becoming Natural as we roll out exciting new things while we grow. Until next time, take those baby steps to a more natural life and always give yourself grace. Progress, not perfection, is the goal. See you next week.